Hi, Dr. Tatiana Street here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about trust. Now, have you ever asked yourself the question, I know this person, I've known them for a while, but something feels off and I don't know if I can trust them? Well, I'm here to tell you that likely it's because how long you've known someone has nothing to do with trust. I know that sounds weird from like an average person perspective because you would think, well, I've known them so much, so why isn't it that I feel like I can trust them or what's going on? Well, that's because trust is fundamentally very different from familiarity or things like how well you get along. Trust is something that is forged specifically in difficult moments, and it's created when you see that that other person has your back. What's interesting is trust is not the absence of difficult conversations. It's actually the result of being able to navigate those difficult moments, ups and downs, in a way that reinforces investment in the relationship. Now, in science, we have this lovely formula, which is the foundations of trust. So, what makes a person trustworthy? And that's credibility, reliability, likability, divided by selflessness, which means, are you credible? Do you have expertise in the area where you say you do? Are you reliable? Do you actually follow through? And are you likable? Do you engage in those social moments of asking people about their family, their day to day? And do you use all of that for your benefit or your counterparts? So, what's fascinating is, let's say you're a very reliable, likable, trust person, but you only use it for your benefit. Well, over time, people are going to know that it really doesn't matter how credible you are. You're always going to kind of screw them over in the moments that matter. Trust is specifically being able to use those things to other people's benefits. Now, trust is very much a long-term game. When trust is present in a negotiation in a professional relationship, you're enhancing the satisfaction of your counterpart. You're increasing that person's desire to work with you again. You're enhancing negotiation outcomes, and you are also enhancing team performance if there's multiple people at the table. It's also a very important aspect when we think about uncertainty and when we think about the way we engage in people, whether it's in person or online. Now, generally, creating a trustful dynamic begins in person. Why? Because the behavioral cues to create trust are actually very much tied to emotion. It is that intricate dance between two people. So a smile and the reciprocity of that smile, or excitement and then someone taking your excitement and building upon it. It's also the ability that when you say something that's off, the other person can kind of pause and learn more about you, or they can apologize if they've done something incorrectly. Trust happens with those behavioral cues in which two people correspond back and forth. And it's very much the outcome, as I said, of being able to go through difficult moments and answering the fundamental question of, do you have my back? What's interesting when we think about science and how we can leverage it, well, I love to play in the space of body language. So one of the things that you can think about is when you're starting a relationship, it's always important to give people more information and access to your body, because that is the components that are starting to create trust. So generally, I would advise when you're building a relationship, start with in person and then Zoom followed by over email. If you're bound by email, then make sure you're putting in some emotional words speaking to the relationship. So for example, things like, I'm so excited to be working with you. I've heard wonderful things. I'm so excited about this project. I think we can make a wonderful difference for both our, groups or for the company. Anything that's kind of starting to tie a unit, creating a unit, an us. You're starting to build the relationship that is there. You're also starting to give those cues to suggest you are invested in the relationship, which specifically comes from those positive emotional cues. When it comes to also thinking about how to build trust, it's important to use that likability factor. So what does that mean? Before getting down to business, taking some time to understand that person, understand their context, understand what they care about, try to connect with them on any number of things, whether or not you have a family, whether or not you went to the same, undergrad, whether or not you have the same hobby. any of those aspects are so important, because once there's a sense of us, it's so much easier to start beginning to extend and being willing to engage in that emotional dance. Very often people are the most emotionally free in relationships where they feel comfortable. So that's why it's so important to begin that dance and to allow yourself to be very expressive and engaged in your relationships, whether it's client, professional relationships, or you're trying to secure a job offer. All of these hacks are so important. It's also vital to know that in good relationships, like the definition of a good relationship is being able to handle difficult moments. In a professional context, it's the capacity of the relationship. So what are the wonderful things you guys can create as a team? And also the tensility, the ability to have a very difficult conversation for the benefit of creating a wonderful solution. That means that you need to buffer the relationship before you get to those difficult moments. And buffering the relationship means investing in it. It means expressing positive emotional expressions so that it can handle the negativity that can come from just difficult discussions. So the last hack I think I want to kind of leave you with is there's also some really good science that talks about the concepts of mimicry. And we're more likely to mimic individuals that are in our in-group and that we like. So allowing yourself the flexibility to mimic behaviorally. You can also mimic vocally. So using the same language that your counterpart uses is a really great hack to subconsciously start that dance between two people. Now, all of this, I know I recently was giving this talk and I was talking about these elements, and an individual came up to at the end and they said, I'm really concerned about whether or not this is authentic. I want to be really authentic in all my professional dealings, and some of what you're saying seems a bit performative. And I do get this response every once in a while, and I know the individuals who ask it of me. It is individuals that want to have authentic relationships. And to them I say that this knowledge is actually very freeing, that they can be more of themselves. At no point am I saying be distrusting, be someone that you're not, play to other people's wants and needs and fantasies where you can't deliver. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is the foundation of trust is an emotional dance, and it requires you to actually be open and interested in the person and to engage with them as people, but biologically, as I said, that those emotional cues, the back and forth, the mimicry. If you understand this, it means you can actually be more of yourself in the interaction. And just because it's professional doesn't mean we stop being social creatures. It doesn't mean you all of a sudden shut down your emotions. Your emotions and that ability to be personable in your professional life is such an asset. And if that's your tendency, then this research is actually quite validating to allow yourself to be more of that. The important thing to note in all of this is all these cues, and when you're building trust, it's so that you can have the difficult conversations. So if you love the idea of being authentic at work, but it limits your ability to have difficult conversations in your professional relationships, well, then you haven't done a really good job at understanding what is the reality of those relationships that you're forming. If you're scared to have difficult conversations, it means you're scared to voice. It means you're scared to actually show up and advocate for yourself. So you haven't actually forged a good relationship. You've kind of forged one on the idea of nicety. So the core of all of this is, how can you facilitate good, difficult conversations so you guys can problem solve? And that element comes from your willingness to test. It comes from the ability to caretake for the relationship, then build trust in those difficult moments, and then reap the benefits of trust in the relationship and as part of your reputation. As always, trust is very much a long-term game. I think in the context of negotiations, we need to think about our relationships not just as one-shot deals, but how can we create maximum value throughout the course of the entire relationship? And that is a long-term play, and that I think is the best play, because these negotiations are going to have impacts for us, not just in the relationship, but also in our reputational outcomes. So I challenge you to think a little bit more about how you can show up in your relationships. And if you feel like you've known someone, but that trust isn't there, likely it's because you haven't tested the relationship enough and you haven't actually created true trust, which is navigating the difficult moments. And I'd encourage you to use those hacks to buffer the relationship and then be willing to engage in the difficult discussions. So that is, I think, a different way to think about trust and a different way to think about your willingness to have difficult conversations. And I'd very much encourage you to think about all of that.